Do you remember when you were a child and the concept of good and evil was so easy? When morality was black and white, when you can easily point at someone and say they're a good person or a bad person? Do you remember the first time your sense of justice was put into question? When you realized that there was something wrong with the way you saw the world? When you experienced your first moral dilemma? When you realized how helpless you are in the face of injustice? As I've mentioned in a previous video, the question of what is moral is one that haunts our experiences, because what is ethical is never truly clear-cut. Ethics, morality, what is just is defined by the time and place it's in. It's dictated by culture, dominant religion, type of government, etc., not even taking into account human experience and socio-economic political situations. But does that mean that we just have to accept every moral dilemma as just another thing we brush aside? Does that mean we just ignore every injustice as just another thing we cannot change? Does that mean we accept the world as it is? I have long since stopped practicing Catholicism, but there was a prayer that stuck with me not for religious reasons but as a self-reminder. You may know this as the Serenity prayer of St. Thomas More. God, grant me the courage to change the things I can change, the serenity to accept those I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. But God, grant me the courage not to give up on what I think is right, even though I think it is hopeless. And though it was just another prayer when I was younger, it became a part of my own personal philosophy of ethics as I grew older and I gained that wisdom. That being said, although our individual lives are unique, this evolution of morality and how we see the world and our morphing sense of justice is a product of time and experience. We don't come out the womb as the be-all, end-all authority of what is right and wrong, even though we think we are as young, optimistic children. Life has a way to complicate things. But how do we resolve these complexities? What does it take to break down and rebuild our sense of justice? And how do we move forward with our lives? Hello everyone! Rosabel's here, and in this video, we're going to turn the analysis spotlight onto the former LGD Special Inspection Unit Chief turned Rhodes Island operator, Chen, and her two alters. We'll look at the story behind each version, how her character has developed over these stories, and of course, connect all of this to the gameplay of all three. Welcome to the lore and ludonarrative analysis on Chen, Chen Squared, and Chen the Third. Just to make sure we're all covered, spoiler warning for like the whole beginning act of Arknights until like episode 8, Dossoles Holiday, such as the joy of our reunion, a bit of IS-6, and of course the current event, First of 1,000 Autumns. I will also be including information from operator files, records modules, voice lines, and of course, our beloved lore Bible Terra A Journey as appropriate. And you don't have to, but I suggest you watch my mini analysis on the Lungmen Trio, at least Chen's part, which is like the first part. Again, you don't have to because I'll expound on my talking points more here, but it will give you a good idea of the direction of this analysis.
Amia trusts you completely. When I see you two together, it makes me wonder, what if I had someone like that by my side?
We first meet Chen as one of the key characters in the earlier chapters of the main story, the no-nonsense tsundere chief of the Special Inspection Unit of the Lungmen Guard Department, or the LGD. She gives off main character energy right off the bat, not just because she's a leader with a badass legendary sword, but it is easy to make the connection to the fact that she's a lung or a dragon, and you think of the name of the city, Lungmen, and the Yan faction, whose symbol is a face of a dragon. There's something there. And I think this is something that people tend to overlook when we talk about Chen. To understand her, we must first understand where she comes from. And to understand that, we first have to talk about the Lung race. Now, when we think of dragons, there are two depictions of dragons that would be more familiar to you. These are typically divided into Western and Eastern dragons. The more Western depiction of dragons, famously expounded by J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit trilogy, George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, and Bethesda's Skyrim, to name a few, described them as fire-breathing creatures of greed, sin, and destruction. They are often depicted as large, stocky, quadrupedal lizards armored in thick scales with massive bat wings and the ability to breathe fire. They are associated with volcanoes, mountains, and hordes of wealth inside that they protect, as a sort of evil that must be eradicated by the heroes of their mythos. This is thus the basis of the Draco race in Arknights, the dragon race originally from Victoria, which is based off of London or the West, and so we have the history of Victoria where the Aslan triumphed over the Draco as a sort of homage to the more Western depiction of dragons. However, the Eastern dragons, which we can see in media such as Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away, Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball Z, or even Disney's Mulan, to name a few, these dragons often have long, scaled serpentine bodies and are a hybrid of multiple animals, usually with the horns of a stag, talons of a bird, and whiskers and fins of a koi fish, and they are capable of flying even without wings, which is the basis of the Lung race. That is why, though he is a koi fish, Lee is also considered a Lung. In comparison to Western dragons, Eastern dragons are seen positively. They are representations of wisdom, benevolence, and good fortune, and are often associated with water and air. Thus, in many East Asian mythologies, this depiction of a dragon was seen as the ultimate symbol of supreme power, royalty, and divine authority, and was thus associated with the emperor. And as a parallel, we have the ruler of Yan, the true Lung, who resides in Baijiao, the capital of Yan. Now, for the purposes of this video, we will not be talking about the history of the true Lung and the Ferament Sui. We'll save that when I eventually have the courage and mental capacity to tackle the Sui proxies in this series. Oh boy. But just because we're not focusing on the Sui and their sideline influence in this particular story, it doesn't make it a simple one. Even though the true Lung is the emperor of Yan, the current true Lung, as of the start of our story, Yan Li, did not rise to power in the traditional sense. By traditional, we mean the usual passing down of power from an emperor to a chosen son. Yan Li became the true Lung as a result of a coup d'etat by the former true Lung's own children. Wait, is that really a coup d'etat or just normal parricide? Huh, you learn something new every day. You see, the previous true Lung was a good ruler. However, like most stories in Arknights, tragedy struck when he contracted oropathy. Now, of course, at the time, the stigma against the infected was so much worse. And so the fact that he was oropathic was kept a secret between the royal family and the Grand Ministers, who were basically the main ruling bodies of Yan. After all, like we mentioned before, the Lung or the Eastern Dragon is the symbol of supreme rule. If the very symbol of power fell to oropathy, what would that do to the collective ego of a vast nation like Yan? They were able to keep up the facade for some time, but as the true Lung never received treatment nor was allowed outside, his condition got worse and worse until his decisions became erratic and unreasonable. Now, there was some Sui proxy influence here, but like I said, this is not the story we're focusing on. Yan Li originally didn't want to be the ruler. The role was supposed to fall on his elder brother by succession, the crown prince Yan Wu, who was also more suited for the role of emperor, being someone who is very politically fluent, direct, and decisive. Yan Li wanted to use this opportunity to leave politics altogether and to pursue his true passion of being a copyist in the Sky Mirror Pavilion.
But I don't want any of that. I'd rather...
Rather what?
I'd rather just sing.
With the coup secretly sanctioned by the Grand Advisors of Yan, Yan Wu entered his father's chambers in the dead of night, backed by 18 Imperial guards who have sworn their loyalty to him. Armed with a deadly blade known as the Qi Shao, he effectively euthanized his father, the true Lung. At least, that's what we think happened. Nobody truly knows what happened behind those closed doors. Mayhaps it will be revealed in the future still, but it ended with the true Lung dead, and whatever happened shook Yan Wu so much that he escaped and fled Baijiao with his imperial guards. In the midst of the chaos, the only thing Yan Li could do to stabilize the court was to take over as the True Long and perform a violent and rigorous political purge to make sure that everything, from his father's oripathy to the truth of the murder, was kept secret from the public. He even declared his elder brother Yan Wu an exile.
I'd rather just sing.
Stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here.
Yan Wu, on the other hand, made it all the way to the port city Lungmen, followed by his younger sister Yan Jing, who tried to tell him to go back to Baijiao and make peace with Yan Li, the new True Lung. She ultimately decides to stay with him in Lungmen with the promise that he will return to Baijiao when the time is right. Yan Wu thus established himself in Lungmen and changed his name to Wei Yan Wu, and the 18 Imperial Guards became his Shadow Guards.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
He systematically consolidated control over Lungmen, which was a difficult feat because of the heavy Ursa's influence on Lungmen from their sheer proximity. This was also in the peak of Du Kashe's involvement in Ursa's border expansion campaign, and going into Yan territory through Lungmen was his goal. In this effort, he allied with Edward Artorius, who was a Draco noble that fled Victoria during the purge of the Draco royal bloodline from the conflict between the Aslans and the Draco. Together, they managed to get rid of all the Ursa-aligned forces and liberate Lungmen. Edward and Wei Yan Wu became sworn brothers, and he even approved of Edward's relationship with his sister, Yan Jing. This does not go smoothly, however. Word makes it to the True Lung regarding the relationship between the two, although the circumstances of how the information made it to the True Lung was never revealed. It might be tied to Clovicia, though this is mostly speculation. Kashe claims he had no involvement. Either way, Edward, Wei Yan Wu, and Yan Jing were brought before the True Lung for judgment. At this point, Yan Jing was pregnant with Edward's child. Now, remember, at this point, the whole Yan family is on thin ice. Any slip-up and the secret of the royal family will be discovered. They can't afford any possible political issues since this will invite scrutiny from political enemies, and the marriage between a Draco, with the ongoing politics in Victoria, and the Lung was not a good look. And so, Wei Yan Wu was given an ultimatum. Kill Edward, his sworn brother, or Yan Jing, his pregnant sister. Wei Yan Wu chose the former and killed Edward. Yan Jing gave birth to a beautiful Draco named Tallulah Artorius, who luckily inherited more Lung traits than Draco, at least physically, though she did inherit the Draco propensity for fire. To further conceal the truth of Tallulah's heritage, she was also made to marry another Yanese man, and she gave birth to Tallulah's half-sister, our very own Chen. And isn't that something? We have Tallulah, primarily regarded as a Draco, and Chen a Lung. Western and Eastern dragons. Tallulah continues on the legacy of dragons being seen as evil beings, at least in the beginning of the story, associated with fire, and Chen being the harbinger of justice, associated with water. I see you, HG. I see you.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We're still in chapter 1 of this analysis. Yan Jing never forgave Wei Yan Wu, even on her deathbed. And Wei Yan Wu never told the girls the truth behind the death of Edward and the reasons for it. In Chen's perspective, this looks like Wei Yan Wu forced his sister to remarry just because they couldn't stand having her single after the death of her first husband. It didn't help when Duke Kashe kidnapped Tallulah to leverage her complicated heritage as a political pawn and strapped enough explosives on her to level Lungmen to the ground, forcing Wei Yan Wu to allow it to happen. Again, in Chen's perspective, her uncle allowed her stepsister to be kidnapped, perhaps related to the weird looks Tallulah receives, being called an omen because she still looks unusual despite her Lung traits. And so we see this theme in Chen's story, where although there are certain things she was privy to, she was largely isolated from the darker details of her own family. She knows she's part of the royal family and what the royal family should do, but not the whole coup to get rid of an infected father. She knows she's a result of a disastrous remarriage that her mother blames on Wei Yan Wu, but not the ultimatum and the political tension that forced that hand. She knows that Tallulah was kidnapped by Kashi, and Wei and Wu did nothing but not the extreme circumstances they were caught in. And this isolation is a deliberate decision. At the end of the day, she is of royal blood, and though she is not a child of any of the main lines, the Yan family will always have a duty to their nation. Wei and Wu wanted to entrust the future of Lungmen to Chen, and she inherited the very blade that started this whole mess, the Qi Shao. Oh boy, the irony of this is so palpable. We'll get back to that, but if you know, you know. After graduating top of her class in the Victoria Royal Guard Academy, because of course she did, she was classmates with Bagpipe too, by the way, she chose against Wei Yanwu's expectations to join the LGD under the Special Inspection Unit. He was resistant because he knew exactly what Chen wanted to investigate, the kidnapping of her stepsister, but eventually he relented. And that is the background of Chen. To put this all together, Chen was a child of privilege, well-educated, good family background, proud family history, relatives in high places, a bit of trauma here and there, but overall she grew up well. And just like all children who grew up with such privilege, she was rather isolated. Not isolated in the sense that she was kept from interacting with others, but isolated in the sense that her experiences were very much filtered or catered to her family's specifications. Meaning she was kept in the dark about the political maneuvers of her family, how they deceive the public to maintain their image, and the ways they preserve their power and name, all the while being raised under the flag that she had the world wide open to her, that she would be destined for greatness. In summary, Chen was an isolated idealist, someone who was raised in a curated environment. All her achievements and her life trajectory, though she may think she made all of these decisions on her own, were all fixed for her. She's a Nepo baby. A hard-working one, but a Nepo baby nonetheless. Thus, she has the combination of the naive fresh graduate optimism that if they work hard enough, they can achieve whatever they want, but at the same time, she has this sense of authority that her sense of justice is the correct one, and she has the capability and the resources to pursue it to the end. This is the Chen that joins us initially in Rhodes Island, all the way back in Main Story Episode 5, Necessary Solutions.
Chen, leader of the LGD's Special Inspection Unit. For my own reasons, I'll be joining you for a while. Seeing as we're already well acquainted from our prior work together, I'll ask you to take me to my workplace now.
For the purposes of this chapter, we will be analyzing Chen with mostly the information we had on her as of the time of her release. This is important for some of the main points I'm going to make. This means that at this point, we have yet to know most of the backstory regarding the Yan royal family that I spent how many minutes telling you in the previous chapter. It is implied that she has connections in high places due to Wei Yanwu, but the extent of her bloodline has not been revealed. Although, astute readers would notice those traits that I pointed out earlier, the significance of Eastern dragons, the fact that the symbol of Yan is a dragon, blah 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 blah. Chen joins us as a dual striker guard, which was before the rework during Dossoles when they formalized her class into a sword master. This is a class of guard whose normal attacks strike twice. It is implied that this class is so good at using a sword that they can hit 100% more than a normal sword user. At this point, she was the first of her class, and so she kind of set the standard for what a sword master should be. Characteristics of a sword master guard is below average base attack, average overall stats, and their skills are all offensive recovery. No, we're not talking about Degen Breaker. Shh, it's okay. She'll probably have a video eventually. We'll tackle it then. Shh. Though it sounds not that great, the sword master class's claim to fame was their high-powered burst skills, which we will discuss in the latter part of this chapter. But for now, let's take a look at her talents. Her first talent gives us a very good insight into her character. Every few seconds when deployed, she restores one skill point to all deployed allies that have an offensive recovery or defensive recovery skill every 4 or 5 seconds. On paper, it sounds fine, and it showcases Chen's willingness to help others as one of the superintendents of the LGD. Offensive and defensive recovery skills are notoriously difficult to manage, and having them autofill is a good thing, even though it's every few seconds. However, at the time when Chen was released, there were only 18 units that even had offensive and defensive recovery skills. That is 18 out of 93 characters released at that time across all rarities, amounting to less than a fifth of the units in Rhodes Island. And for most of them, it's only one of their skills that has that property. And this also reflects Chen's sense of justice. As we mentioned before, she's very idealistic, and paired with her lineage of prestige and royalty, she has a natural tendency to believe that her sense of justice is the only sense of justice. And this talent reflects that, because she is someone with only offensive recovery skills. So obviously, she will only assist those who have the same skill recovery type as her. And in the process of that, we can see that the only true person who benefits from her talent is herself. I don't know about you, but I don't think I've seen people be like, oh yeah, bring Chen to charge Lapland's skill. Yeah, no. This reflects how her sense of justice is based only on her perception of what is right, and at the cost of disregarding others that don't agree, which we can see in the statistics in our operators is the vast majority. And in this state of mind, the only person who benefits is Chen. And I mean, the talent is literally called scolding. Ironic, isn't it? A talent and mindset meant to help others and provide assistance is actually more self-serving. Keep this theme in mind. It's a special point that we will bring up again in the future. No, we're not doing the Gladia or Pianus thing, no need for a counter. Her second talent is more of a generic boost, which gives her additional attack, defense, and physical dodge. The name Blade Art implies that this is supposed to reflect her sword skills, and it manifests as base boosts that would give her better stats and dodge, a result of hard work and dedication. Her files tells us that she's a workaholic and she's obsessed with improving herself and getting stronger. Her talent reflects that. Nothing too much to write about, but this will give us the main themes of her talents. So in the future alters, we will be discussing her talents as a part of these two themes. She has one talent that buffs others, and she has one talent that just buffs herself. We will be framing her talents as such moving forward. Now, we look at her skills. Her 3 skills are all techniques of the Qi Shao, her legendary sword. We learn through the story that the Qi Shao is not an ordinary blade. It can only be unsheathed in special circumstances. What circumstances that was, Chen did not fully understand. Eventually, in her X module, she would associate the unsheathing of the sword to a strong will. Though in the same module, it would show the consequences of unsheathing and using the blade's techniques. Mayhap such a restriction was the reason why the coup ended in such a disaster, but that is just speculation. The way she has such limitations when she uses the Qi Shao expands to her skills, and the reason why they are all burst skills, that is to say, skills that end immediately after activation. Her first skill is her literally bonking the enemies with her sword still sheathed, which deals extra attack and stuns them for an amount of time. Again, the Qi Shao can't be unsheathed all willy-nilly, and so her first skill, which we can get when we have Chen and not level her up, it shows that she needs to be developed for her to start unsheathing her sword. We go to her second skill, Qi Shao Unsheath, where she literally unsheaths the blade, and just in doing that, it deals physical and arts damage to up to 7 enemies in the range of the attack. This showcases the underlying power of Qi Shao. It's indeed not just an ordinary blade. A very interesting detail I like about this skill is that at full mastery, the skill can be activated immediately upon Chen's deployment. That she had achieved such mastery that she is ready to unsheath Qi Shao when you put her down. And finally, her third skill, Qi Shao Shadowless. She seeks the closest enemy and deals up to 10 slashes to them with massive physical damage. If the enemy survives, then the last hit will stun them for a few seconds. It is a strong finisher and is often used to finish an elite or leader enemy on the spot. There's actually an anecdote in her X module that the first time she released Shadowless, she was unconscious for 5 days after. The skill puts a huge strain on her in exchange for massive burst damage and stun. And this brings us to the crux of our analysis on Chen. As powerful as her skills are, there are two main disadvantages of Chen's three skills. The first is that these skills are only burst skills, so they have no extended duration. You activate them, they hit, and then the skill is resetted. The second goes back in relation to her talent. They are all offensive recovery. She has to charge her skill by warming up against enemies. Her talent does make this easier, but most people would have the first iteration of this talent, which would recover the skill every 4 seconds. And with these two disadvantages, Chen's kit masterfully tells us the limitations of her technique, as well as hints us on some flaws in Chen's character. Upon deployment with her talent, the skills are viable. She just needs a few hits or a few seconds to charge. However, after the first activation, unless you can get her in a good position to charge up her skill, activating her skills a second time takes way too long or is too inconvenient. In this case, she's only useful as a heli drop unit. You put her down, activate her skill once, then retreat her. And this adds another layer of complexity when using Chen. You have to be decisive when and where to use her and time her skills correctly. Once again, we see this motif of someone who should be a team player and yet is acting on her own. Her talents benefit primarily her. Her skills only help in the short term. And even then, you need to time her properly or the strategy goes out the window. And I think this is the perfect gameplay manifestation about Chen and her sense of justice. On paper, her skills sound amazing. On paper, Chen's idealistic point of view seems justified. But when you put it into action and you actually try to apply this to the real world, it all falls apart. Like a naive child who enters the world thinking they know right from wrong, good from evil. In her one-track mind, all her efforts in training to be the best and into unsheathing Chi Xiao and wanting to impress her uncle, all the while working hard to find her stepsister, this created a woman who works on her own, who is unable to extend her help to others outside of her periphery. And just like her talents, rather than help others, she appears to be more self-serving. I mentioned in the mini analysis that the sword is a fitting weapon for someone like Chen. You're either on the wrong side of the sword or on the safe side, and it just takes one decisive swing to decide life or death, right or wrong. But the Chi Xiao is a blade that cannot just be unsheathed and used. The way it holds Chen back from dealing one decisive blow after the other seems to be a blessing in disguise. There is growth needed. There are lessons that need to be learned. Chen cannot hold Chi Xiao to the fullest, and with that cannot enact her justice. But what will it take for her to become worthy of mastering the Chi Xiao?
I left Lungmen in search of something. Something that I can only find on my own. But you Rhodes Islanders, you have the strength to win people over with your ideals. And I hope you won't let me down. Me? I'm not there yet. I need to be faster.
Now, I won't talk about everything that happened in the Chernobog Lungmen incident. It was a lot, 8 episodes worth. Chen primarily worked on the side of the LGD during the incident, at one point even abandoning Rhodes Island to head back to Lungmen when Reunion managed to take over. But I will talk about certain experiences that I think are critical in understanding the direction of Chen's development. We learn early on that the infected Lungmen were all placed in the slums, and as the name implies, the area is not cared for by the public. We learn of Chen's soft side regarding the slums and how she often tried to lend a helping hand. It would be much later when we found out that she even tried establishing an LGD office in the slums. It would make sense with Chen's sense of justice that she cannot stand to see injustice even in an area so discriminated against. But an event would happen that would make us understand that this is a bit more personal for Chen. And that event, of course, was the major reveal that Chen is oropathic in episode 7. This was actually hinted in her file. Why else would they mark her health as confidential to a pharmaceutical company specializing in oropathy? Chen's operator record also reveals just how she got Oripathy in the first place. 3 years before the events at Chernobog, she and her senior Nine were ambushed by an Originium bomb. Nine tried to cover Chen, but some shards went through and Chen was infected. And thus comes the irony of her wielding the Qi Shao, the very weapon Wei Yanwu used to euthanize his oropathic father, now being held by his niece who contracted oropathy. It would be beautifully poetic if it was not so tragic. I'm sure the significance did not escape Wei Yanwu. Sympathy aside, this gives us another perspective on Chen's softness towards those in the slums. She is supposed to be one of them. In fact, she would have probably ended up as part of Reunion, but the only reason why she was spared the same fate as Nine was because Wei Yanwu kept her condition a secret, and thus allowed her the privilege of continued work despite her status as an infected. Nine was not given the same grace. She was at least allowed to resign with dignity. The reason for her resignation was not publicized, but that was how she ended up joining Reunion. Look, I'm sure Chen deserved her position in the LGD. Nepotism aside, it is stated in her file that she worked her butt off to be better every time. But the fact that she kept her job when anyone else would have been kicked off the force and kicked into the slums? Definitely something to side-eye on, and definitely something that she would feel guilty about, especially after Wei Yanwu's order. Now, what she was unaware of was the fact that Wei Yanwu's order to purge the slums was one made out of anxiety, since he had gotten the impression that Reunion had infiltrated Lungmen, nor was she aware that the Rat King's interference with Lin, the Rat King's daughter, helping the innocent infected escape the massacre. What she did return to were the slums lined with bodies of the infected, many dressed as civilians. Again, we have this returning theme of Chen being kept in the dark, of not knowing the entirety of the situation and passing judgment. And something like this was the last straw for her and her strained relationship with Wei Yanwu. After she confronts her uncle, she informally quits by throwing her badge down, and after the fight with the Lula, hands in her formal resignation. She then decides to join Rhodes Island. Now, Chen doesn't change immediately when she formally started working with us. Initially, Chen was very resistant to Rhodes Island's goals. The way Rhodes Island functions goes against her philosophy, you see. She's very headstrong and very action-focused. To her, you must choose a side and stick with it and be direct and decisive. Rhodes Island, as primarily a pharmaceutical company that just so happened to have elite warriors in tow, and a few war criminals here and there, had a more peaceful approach to treat and to protect the infected. As an independent company, they are able to retain the stance of a neutral party in political affairs and focused only on the treatment of the infected. This ranges from providing clinics and healthcare, as well as deploying business envoys to discuss possible changes of policies with the government to give better treatment. Ironically, Chen thought that Rhodes Island was being idealistic, while she held the ground of harsh reality. She thought that the way Rhodes Island handled the situation is naive and inefficient versus her stance of justice by any means necessary. Subdue those who go against our goals, be aggressive with the approach, set judicial boundaries, and follow that. And if I was 10 years younger, I would have probably agreed with her. As I became older and wiser, however, the irony of this point of view is palpable. She will later then learn that she was the idealistic one, while Rhodes Island understood perfectly the harsh reality of the world and is working with it. And that lesson, and along with it her shift in perspective, began when she took a vacation in Siesta, but was requested to represent her uncle in Dossoles, thus beginning the events of Dossoles Holiday. In this event, Chen gets wrapped up into a competition, teamed up with Lin, who was there representing the Rat King. Guided by Ernesto, aka Tequila, Chen had to give up her sword and be armed with a non-lethal water gun for the purposes of the competition. But there was conflict brewing underneath the surface. Both Lin and Chen could feel it even during the early stage of the competition. There was something not right about Dossoles and its perfect opulence. And their suspicions were not for nothing. The mayor of Dossoles, Candela, managed to create the city by extorting and choking the warring factions of Bolivia, threatening to cut off their supplies and economy if they tried to target Dossoles. She was willing to turn a blind eye to the crimes in her city for as long as Dossoles maintained its power over the warring factions of Bolivia. It would be an understatement to say that she had made enemies on the way, and one of the enemies she made was Pancho Salas, a veteran who was part of the true Bolivian faction in the Tri-Faction War. After a disastrous operation that ended with over 3,000 men dying, Pancho took his son, Ernesto, and the daughter of a fallen comrade he adopted, Rafaela, aka La Pluma, to Dossoles. As time passed and the longer he stayed, he couldn't help but feel bitter at the rampant materialism and the corruption that happens on a day-to-day basis, all to keep Dossoles as this war-free economic zone of Bolivia. And so, he teamed up with his enemy, the Laithanian Singas, to get the firepower that he would need to usurp Candela and take over Dossoles as his own base of operations against the three factions. Pancho acted as Candela's assistant and eventually became captain of a cruise ship and a speaker for the Dossoles Warrior Championship. His children helped him behind the scenes, and though he appeared kind and favorable during the start of the competition, it all came to a head towards the end when he revealed his intentions. At this point, both Chen and Lin were the first in running in the competition, mostly due to Lin's arts. Despite them being ganged up on by the other competitors, Lin's glass arts and her ability to speed and slip through people made sure that even at a disadvantage, they would always make it first out of the rounds. Now, due to Ernesto being all suspicious during the last event, the triathlon, Chen confronts him and finds out about Pancho's plan to wake up the Bolivians in Dossoles. Not long after, Pancho made his plot known and revealed the several bombs that he had planted throughout the city. Lucky for Dossoles, Rhodes Island had a few operators stationed, including Sideroca, Cicero, and Eyjafjalla, and Swire and Hoshigumo were present as well, and they managed to mitigate most of the damage. Pancho's trump card, however, was that he managed to hold several Bolivian dignitaries across the three warring factions on his cruise ship, and he was trying to get them to submit to his goals. Lin saved the hostages and subdued Rafaela, while Chen defeated Ernesto and kept Pancho distracted long enough for Lin to operate. And operate Lin did, because not only did she save all the hostages, but she transferred all the bombs in Dossoles onto the cruise ship, and as soon as she and Chen got out, detonated the whole thing. Pancho washed up on shore and was arrested after a dinner with Candela, where they spouted their philosophies at each other. However, as a thank you for the service he rendered before his terrorist attack, his allies and children were allowed free, but they were exiled from Dossoles. That's how Tequila and La Pluma joined us in Rhodes Island. Chen, Lin, Swire, and Hoshiguma spent the last days of their vacation hanging out and even sent a commemorative photo for the event to Wei Yanwu. Now at this point, the story seems very lackluster, but I think the true depth of this story is not in the narration of the events, but in the way these events would eventually affect Chen. In order to explain what I mean, we must first analyze the narrative tool used to compare Lin and Chen. One of the critiques I see regarding Dossoles Holiday is that it seems like the story is more focused on Lin, while Chen was mostly on the sidelines experiencing the event rather than being an active participant in its resolution. Towards the end of the story, she acts as just some strong arm to keep the bad guys at bay, while Lin handles the rest of the operation. However, I think the problem with this critique lies in the framing. Rather than thinking of Chen as the overshadowed protagonist, we have to look at the story with the lens of Lin being Chen's character foil. For those who don't listen in their literature class, a character foil is someone who has traits or values that sharply contrast with the person they're being compared to. Usually, this is the protagonist. It's a narrative tool in order to highlight certain aspects of the protagonist by using direct comparison. Famous character foils include Dr. Watson for Sherlock Holmes, with the good doctor acting as the standard of normalcy, of which we can see how much more eccentric and intelligent Sherlock is by comparison. Or Sam for Frodo from Lord of the Rings, Sam's never-ending optimism and loyalty sharply contrasting with Frodo's descent into hopelessness and despair, highlighting the tragedy of Frodo's role as the one who bears the ring. And now we have Lin acting as Chen's foil in Dossoles Holiday, where Lin's efficiency, decisiveness, and her overall competency in the event highlight Chen's fatal flaws. Compared to Chen, Lin worked with her father, the Rat King, in the slums. She grew up knowing she was the heiress to his throne as the king of the criminal underworld, though the title itself sounds more evil than it actually is. In reality, the Rat King handles the slums and is kind and benevolent and is thus loved. It's just sometimes a villain is needed to exist to ensure order. That background alone means that though Lin could grow up with the same power and privilege as Chen, her experiences were not filtered nor catered to the whims of a royal family. She knew what role her and her father play in Wei Yanwu's politics, knew the dark corners of Lungmen and the secrets they hold. That's why, though they spent their childhood together, they diverged heavily in their paths when they grew older. When Chen became a respectable officer in the LGD, Lin worked with the criminal underworld. When Chen conforms to a rigid, upright approach to law enforcement, Lin had learned shady underground ways to deal with her enemies. Lin is everything opposed to Chen, and yet, it was her actions that saved the day. It was her arts that got them through being ganged up upon in the competition. It was her who saved the hostages while defeating La Pluma and who transferred all the terrorist bombs to the cruise ship, saving the people in Dossoles while sinking Pancho's plan. When push came to shove, Lin was the one who knew what to do and was prepared to do it regardless of circumstance. In comparison, Chen, without the backing of her family, without her famous sword, is so limited in what she can actually accomplish. Armed with just a water gun and outside of her family's territory, she's nothing special. Without her identity as a Lung, without the Qi Xiao, who was she supposed to be? And what of her sense of justice? Candela won, but it left a bad taste in Chen's mouth. She defeated a terrorist. Why was she disturbed? Didn't she bring down the hammer of justice, catch the terrorist, and save the day? Or did she just choose one lesser evil over another? Was Candela even the lesser evil? After the events of Dossoles, Rhodes Island was surprised to see a change in her when she returned, and this is very telling. I think this experience shook Chen a lot more than she let on. And thus, we meet Chen the Holungday.
Chen, reporting back in from my holiday in Dossoles. I have a lot of reports to write about my trip, so I'm just passing by to say hello, Doctor. Let me know if you've got something. Now that the holiday's over, everything's back to normal.
Chen the Holungday was released to much controversy in the community, but we're not going to talk about that here. I will analyze her as objectively as I can in relation to her lore. She returned to Rhodes Island with an interest in becoming a sniper operator, much to everyone's surprise. Rhodes Island was definitely not opposed to Chen improving her skill set, but the question was what type of sniper she would be. The water gun Chen used initially was made for mid-range firing, and based on her experience in Dossoles, she very much did not like that. Luckily, we found the perfect weapon for her. And thus, she is a spread-shoot sniper. This class attacks all enemies in a close range and deals extra damage to the enemies in the front row. They have above average health and generally have higher HP and defense versus other snipers in exchange for a much higher deployment cost. This makes sense for her because as primarily a melee fighter, she would be most comfortable handling close combat even on a sniper tile. Now let's look at her talents. We go back to her pattern of having one talent that buffs others and another talent that buffs herself. This pattern continues here. Her first talent states that when deployed, there's a 20 to 22% chance that her skills will not consume any ammo, and for other snipers, they have a 10% chance. Again, this talent seems very helpful. However, just like her previous self, there is a limit, and this is an even more egregious one. If OG Chen could at least help out about a fifth of the operators on release, Chen the Holungday could only help one. Literally one. Todifons. Out of the 200 operators released at the time, just one. That is 0.5% of the operator population. And the help she extends is not even the same amount, just like half of her own percentage. We once again face that irony. A talent meant to help others and provide assistance is actually more self-serving. This time, though, it is because of a drastic limitation. Speaking of limitations, we go to her second talent. Like her OG self, she has a self-buff as her second talent, but it only buffs her attack speed and with an extra boost when she's in a stage with water. Which, with her water gun motif, does make sense. She'll have to have water around to help her reload, but this, before her module, heavily limits the number of stages that can take advantage of this talent. And this is the motif of Chen the Holungday. We may remember her as the delete button and just shelter it, but her main motif is that she is an extremely limited unit. Yes, Chen the Holungday is powerful, but the stars have to align themselves in order for her to work at maximum efficiency. Her ammo saving skill has to proc as many times as it can, there has to be water in the stage, and she needs to have the perfect tile position to maximize her damage output, and prior to Nasty, you have no say on where you can put her really. Like legit, when making these background clears using the 3 Chens, my first question every time is, where the F do I put shelter? Anyway, this is the first motif. And now we go into her skills for what I think is the crux of our analysis on Chen the Holungday. Let's do a quick rundown of her skills because I think the more efficient way to analyze this ludonarratively is to see the skills as a whole versus individually like OG Chen. Her first skill is an auto skill which gives her an attack boost and applies her close range extra damage to all enemies in her attack range during each attack. Her second skill boosts her attack and shoots out a special sticky liquid that decreases enemy movement speed and decreases their defense. And if she charges the skill for longer, she'll start with more bullets. And of course, her claim to fame, her third skill, which shoots out a similar liquid to her second skill, but it gives her an even bigger attack boost and attacks hit twice. She also starts with a ton of bullets. All her skills are ammo based, so when the skill is active, it remains active for as long as Chen has ammo. Now, I believe the ammo-based limitation of her skills and the way that these skills seem to be forms of Originium arts connect to her OG self. In her original files, Rhodes Island has stated that she can channel her Originium arts through something thin like a sword. I like to think that they rigged the ammo in such a way that she can power it with Originium arts for the extra effect, like she learned how to use bullets as a conduit. However, I think the most interesting thing about Chen was her shift in her damage style and her use cases. Chalter here is both a crowd controller, able to deal with large groups of enemies, as well as a continuous source of high damage for more leader or elite enemies. This is a vast departure for her original use case, which is as a heli drop unit. You want Chalter on the field for as long as possible to use her skills for as long as possible. And thus, we reach the crux of all this. Chen the Holungday, skill-wise and use-wise, doesn't sound like Chen. You look at all this together and you have to ask, what is this? She's so different from her Swordmaster self, from the type of damage she does, the tile she's on, her use case, etc. It's like a completely different person. Who is this Chen? It is at this point I want to bring up her E2 art. Fan service aside, where is her representation? A common motif across all operators is that their animal representation is always visible in their E2 art as a part of their identity. In every analysis video I've done thus far, we always point out where their animal representations are, the significance when they don't have it. We pointed out with Skadi, for instance, that the lack of an orca in Sculptor's E2 art, having been replaced with Isharmla, indicates the death of Skadi, that she was no longer Skadi, but Seaborn. Where is the lung in this art? There was one in OG Chen's E2 art, and even in her skin. Where is Chen's animal identity in this art? Did we lose it? Did she lose it? And I think that was the point. Any experience that changes your fundamentals means that the experience affected you a lot. And I think the events in Dossoles somewhat broke our Chen. The tragedy of how Chen grew up is that she rooted so much of her identity in the Qi Shao. She trained endlessly to wield it, pinned her hopes and dreams on it, even tried to get Wei Yanwu's acknowledgement with it, that when she doesn't have it, she loses her sense of identity. Her 2 operator records shed some further light into this. In Belonging, this talked about a conversation Chen had with a tourist during the events of Dossoles Holiday while gathering information regarding the city. After witnessing a bar fight that everyone practically ignored, Chen talks to the tourist about the rampant corruption in Dossoles and why would anyone want to stay here. Now remember that running theme where Chen would pass judgment without knowing the whole story. In this record, the tourist actually breaks that pattern and tells Chen straight up, yo, Dossoles may not be the best place ever, but I would rather be here than be stuck in the middle of a tri-faction civil war, a war that caused me to lose my farmland and my home. At least here I have a shot at a regular life, mayhaps run a coffee shop or something. This is shown in her file as well, where in her write-up about Dossoles, she included everything she could learn about Bolivia from all the people she talked to, as well as her own acknowledgement of her own hasty conclusions. Also, in her second operator record, Pathways, where during her extended stay in Dossoles, she witnessed the corruption that is rampant in the Dossoles police force. Basically, they won't help without bribes, or you can go free at any time if you give them enough money. Knowing she has no authority in Dossoles, Chen decides to trick the police into thinking that Candela would give them a bonus for every criminal caught behind bars with the help of Hoshiguma. And this is big, because this is Chen breaking her own rigid principles to adjust to the situation. She understood that cops don't become cops just to become corrupt. Maybe they just became so easy to bribe because they weren't being paid well. And even so, lying to them so they would do their job was shady and underhand, not like her at all. In a way, we can say that what Chen is experiencing in Dossoles is a form of learned helplessness. It's a phenomenon where people or even animals stop trying after facing repeated failures. Chen's rigid way of doing things, her idealistic way, kept failing her in Dossoles, and so she was forced to go against her own moral code to do anything. And I think this learned helplessness is needed for someone like Chen. It was needed to break down her self-righteous sense of justice, her black and white point of view. And this is growth. But of course, the danger is if she would become too helpless to the point that she loses sight of who she is. Chen the Holungday is the breakdown of Chen, where she loses her identity in the midst of a city that is too much for her to handle. So how appropriate is it that unlike other alters, this Chen's title is nothing noble, nor intriguing, nor a reflection of her growth. Her title is a pun, meaningless, a joke, Holungday. Without the LGD, without her connections, without the Chi Shao, Chen is just another pretty face. Strong, definitely, but not someone who can make any waves. But like Hoshiguma said in the operator record, as well as in Chen the Holungday's file, as good a development this is, she shouldn't lose herself completely to that hopelessness. Who is Chen without her family, without the Chi Shao, and is justice still worth fighting for in the face of rampant corruption and evil? These are the questions she must answer. I mentioned some of this in my mini analysis of the Lungmen altars, and there was a line I cut out because I did post this before we found out about the third altar. I was going to mention in the original script that I felt like her moral growth was sort of a cop-out. It felt unresolved. Yes, there was growth, that she had moved from being an idealist into someone who has accepted that there are gray areas, that morality is more complex, and that there are times when you can't exactly do anything about the evil around you. And yes, that sounds good on a mini analysis. Hey, 30 minutes is mini at this point, have you seen the others? But from a character development standpoint, it feels incomplete, like an arc that has yet to close. So what if she's becoming more accepting of the complexities of morality? So what if she acknowledges her flaws and her limitations? Will she just let it be? Wallow in this learned helplessness and let injustice run rampant? That doesn't sound like Chen at all. Luckily for me, literally 2 days after I posted that video, I started getting comments like these, and that was how I found out about Chen the Third.
I won't doubt Rhodes Island anymore. Your cause, Amia and Dr. Calcit, and all the other operators here are worthy of my respect.
For years, Chen has been in the periphery of several side stories, usually the ones involving other Lungmen officers. During the time between her stint in Dossoles to when we see her again in the First of a Thousand Autumns event, her actions and adventures were chronicled through various files, modules, and art across the time. This is going to be a bit chaotic, so please bear with me. I'm not going for full sequential events, but more of the flow of her growth. We sort of ended Chen the Holungday section on a bit of a melancholy tone, with a smidge of existential crisis and learned helplessness, but it's not actually that devastating. This is Chen, and she's not alone. She had the gang, Hoshi, Swire, and Lin, to kick her in place, and of course, us in Rhodes Island. And there really was nothing to worry about. By the end of her holiday, she seemed to have settled in herself. Not quite resolving everything just yet, but I would say she had calmed down a bit. In Chen the Hollanday's Y module last day of holiday, she was chopping wood with someone named Mikhail. She talked about a few errands she had left for the day. Baking cookies, then lunch with an old artificer to fix a Steam Knight model of hers, then she'll check the fields that are suffering from insects, she'll have to figure out how to spray pesticides with her water gun. A boy runs up to her and asks her how he can be strong like her. She replies her default answer, swing your sword every day. The boy replies, but you've been living in our town for so long and I've never once seen you practice. And this surprises Chen. She had not realized she had not been using the sword for so long. At some point, these little chores that she does, the little ways she helps the people around her, seemed just as important as swinging her sword. Her younger self would have disagreed. And yet, her sword felt sharper than ever. She demonstrates this by unsheathing nothing but air, and yet, a sword seemed to form into her hand as she moved. The little boy closes his eyes, but she just pats his head and tells him to go back to his mother. Miss Chen, if I keep swinging my sword every day, will I be able to do what you just did? He asked. No, just swinging your sword is not enough. You must also walk many, many miles. And many, many miles she had walked since then. What I love about this module is that this story shows how much Chen had settled down. She's not so gung-ho about training every day to release Chi Xiao. She had found value in everyday life, in small things like having lunch with friends, helping with small problems, and yet her sword is still as sharp as ever. There comes a point when it's less about brute strength and more about mindset. And how appropriate that this module both decreases her deployment cost and increases her self-buff and turns the stage into a water stage once she activates her skill. Her limitations are fading away, and by settling down, she had become much stronger. Since Dossoles, Chen appeared in multiple events as a periphery character, lending a hand to her fellow operators. In Where Vernal Winds Will Never Blow, she appeared to save Lin, Waifu, and Chubai. In What the Firelight Casts, she spent the time accompanying her old classmate Bagpipe through Terra. There are also accounts of her traveling to Ursus and helping the infected refugees, seeing a few tragedies along the way. She had indeed walked many, many miles, and it was time for her to head back home. In Chen the Hollanday's X module, we go back to an event in Dossoles when a child went up to Chen asking to help his mother, who was being forced to smuggle by his own father, who had changed into someone extremely money-hungry since moving into Dossoles. His father had once promised that when they have enough money, they'll go on a cruise ship and see the rainbow. And though there have been many rainbows since then, none of that mattered to the boy unless it's with his dad. As she listened to the little boy, Chen could see her past self, endlessly training the Chi Xiao to get Wei Yanwu's attention, and the way she had lost all hope for that. She asked the boy if he still wants to see the rainbow with his dad, and the boy says, yeah, but I can't do it alone. On a rainy day, Chen later saves a woman from a group of criminals. Before the gang leader could fight, a little boy stepped between them. The rain stopped as the boy spoke to the leader, and as a rainbow formed, the leader lowered his weapon. Eyewitness accounts say that Chen didn't look too happy about the resolution, instead just stared off into the east. And it would take some time, but she would eventually head east. In the event First of 1,000 Autumns, she finally gets that conversation with Wei Yanwu, and she got what she should have had in the first place. Context. It was only at this point that she finally learns everything we talked about in 40, 50 minutes ago? How long is this video? Anyway, While the story is focused on Wang's face-off with the bestial Sui in the tomb, Chen acts as the witness. She is there to directly confront the resolution of the decades of political and supernatural decisions both her uncles made, ever since that coup so many years ago. After that running theme of being kept in the dark earlier on in her life, she has made it her resolve that history must record the truth if we are ever to move forward, and that distorting history is what leads to ruin. This is why she inherits Jie's writing knife, as a symbol of her commitment to fight for truth in a world fueled by rumors and defamation. 5 years after the events of Dossoles, Chen returns to us as Chen the Dawnstreak.
Long time no see, Doctor. I know things have gotten pretty serious, so I'm back to lend a hand. In case you need a reminder, I'm still with Rhodes Island.
Chen the Dawnstreak, I believe, shows the full maturation or the result of the combined experiences of the original Chen, who has consolidated the idealist swordsman and the sort of learned helplessness of the water gun bearing spread shooter. She returns to the sword as an arts fighter, a class which can block only one enemy at a time but deals arts damage, though Chen the Dawnstreak displays a lot more nuance than her class. Let's start by comparing their talents. As I said before, Chen's talents are divided into two. One is a self-buff, and the other buffs others. Chen the Dawnstreak breaks this pattern. Her first talent conforms with the self-buff that the other two had, once again focusing on attack speed and attack, but in addition, she deals weakness damage. In Arknights, weakness damage means that the unit will deal physical or arts damage depending on the defense or resistance of the enemy. It's a quick calculation. If the amount of physical damage she can do to an enemy is greater than the amount of arts damage she can do, then she will deal physical damage, and vice versa. We can see here the level of experience and maturity Chen had reached off the bat, and this is a common theme we'll be seeing throughout her gameplay. Even though she is an arts fighter, rather than regulate all damage as arts damage, there is that nuance of weakness. Chen's damage is now efficient, the most damage she could deal to particular enemies. It's like she's taking the time to assess the situation before making her move, which represents her growth in her approach towards justice. The growth she had gained from her holiday in Dossoles, learning about the complexities in morality, that one must understand the situation of others, has now manifested into her fighting style. The biggest change in her, however, is her second talent. She breaks the pattern of her last two versions, and she no longer provides a buff to other operators. Instead, after some time of not taking damage, she heals herself a random amount, and she will be prepped to dodge the next attack. What this says about Chen is that she is putting herself first and at the same time looking ahead. You can argue that it is still self-serving like the talents of the other two versions, but this time, it isn't under the guise of being helpful. For her first two iterations, on paper, her talents appear helpful and selfless, but when placed into action, then it's revealed that it is more self-serving. We associated this to Chen only being able to assist those who conform to her limitations and point of view, either offensive-defensive recovery skills or you're a sniper with ammo. Ironically, Chen the Dawnstreak's removal of this fronting helpfulness makes her more helpful. Since her talent affects her survivability, it makes her independent, and in some sort of twist of fate, this independence allows her to fit in more seamlessly into any team. Like again, in these background clears, I had the easiest time putting down Chen the Third, and I barely had to think of healers or anything for her survivability. It's a huge relief. Moving on to her skills, the most obvious thing you'll notice is that with her return to the sword, she also returned to her three skills. Swordsman Chen and Arts Fighter Chen parallel each other, however there is an interesting growth to Chen the Dawnstreak. She merged the raw power of the OG skills, but incorporated the control of her Chen the Holungday skills. And as a contrast to her original self, she is now able to reliably unsheath Chi Xiao. And this reflects in the fact that compared to OG Chen, all her skills are now auto-recovery, meaning she has no need to wind up for her skill to be ready, and all her skills now have durations, meaning they are no longer burst damage. She can now keep her sword unsheathed and use its power over prolonged periods. Looking into her skills individually tells us more. Her first skill is an homage to her sword master self. Once activated, she attacks twice and her attacks disarm her enemies. What I like about this skill is that it shows the two sides of this new Chen. She acknowledges her past self as a sword master, but has built it up such that even something like a basic attack would silence enemies, stopping them from using their skills. Acceptance and growth in one. Dawnstreak Chen's second skill gives us even more insight. This is equivalent to OG Chen's third skill, but with a lot more words. So before we talk about the second skill, let's talk about her OG third skill, specifically the bad things about it. The limitation or the grievance against the original skill is that a lot of it feels wasted. She does 10 slashes to a single target regardless of whether or not it is necessary. Probably against a boss with a massive HP pool it's fine, but it feels wasted on other enemies, especially since the skill takes 30 SP to charge. You become hyper aware of when you should activate the skill, that it adds an element of stress when planning. Is it a good time to activate it? Is it worth the 10 slashes? In comparison, Chen the Dawnstreak refined this attack such that the attacks are not wasted. If an enemy dies, she moves on to the next, on and on until she lands on an enemy who will not be killed. Then she moves over to continue the 1v1 with whoever won't die. Paired with her first talent, whoever is left is probably not long for this world. If she kills all possible enemies, it's fine. The rest of the time, she remains buffed until the skill duration ends. In a sense, she had mastered the Qi Shao to the extent that she can fully utilize its raw power by, ironically, holding herself back. She doesn't go all out in one go. Once again, we go into this theme where her old selves tend to overextend themselves rather than focus on herself and her control over her sense of judgment. This skill is honestly my favorite in terms of flavor because it merges the raw power of OG Chen with the control and crowd managing powers of Chen the Holungday, the perfect manifestation of her growth over the years. In the end, a skill that was once hyper-focused on taking care of one problem on the map is now a skill that you can use generally against any mob or a mixture of enemies. Her third skill is the full capability of Qi Shao, her OG self second skill but in its fullest potential. She can now attack and hit multiple enemies at a time for a longer duration, but at the same time, she releases the spirit of the Qi Shao, an effing dragon, to roam the map. It makes sense now why it's considered a legendary blade. It is the very spirit of Yan, calling back to the significance of the Eastern Dragon and the power it represents. No wonder Jun was able to recognize Chen as from the House of Yan from the sword alone. I mentioned before that Chen's use of a sword reflects her idealistic sense of justice, but the OG Chen was unable to unsheath her sword for long periods. After losing sight of who she is in Dossoles, she spent time building herself back up, refining her sense of justice by experiencing the world. As she said in her Holungday module, it is not about just training the sword over and over, but also walking many miles. Like I said before, Chen the Holungday was the breakdown of Chen, and that was needed for her to broaden her horizons and open herself up to the world. Learned helplessness that she must overcome. I mentioned early on that her being unable to unsheath the Qi Shao was a blessing in disguise. It stopped her from immaturely enacting her naive sense of justice. Now that she had been refined, now that she had experienced life, had her moral code broken and rebuilt, now she can unsheath the Qi Shao to its fullest. Now she can enact her more matured and refined justice. We can see this growth as well in the comparison of their E2 arts. OG Chen is facing us with her swords out. To her back, I assume, is the LGD, it looks like them. Her representation is clear here and the Qi Shao is unsheathed. In contrast, Chen the Dawnstreak's Elite 2 art is of a very similar color palette and composition. However, her back is to us, her front is to the people behind her. After coming from having an E2 art without her representation, the lung is back here and is much larger, encompassing the whole skyline. Once again, her Qishao is unsheathed, but you can see its true power shooting out, and in her other hand, the writing knife entrusted to her. And this is where it all comes home. Chen's original art shows her self-centered form of justice, of marching forward without looking back, focusing on herself and her goals, and what she perceives is justice. Her lung is flanking only her. Chen the Dawnstreak faces the past, the people she is meant to care for and to save, but at the same time, her eyes are fixed towards the future. This time, fully ready to make the right choices. Her lung here is over the people behind her, as if prioritizing them over her own self. When Chen first meets the Faramut Jun during the event, after Jun recognizes Chen's lineage, she asks her, "What say you? What's the difference between forcing one's will against the masses and enlightening the masses with the insight of one's mind?" Well, I think we can see the answer right here. Chen had broken through the old stubbornness of her family, had broken free from her family's catered experiences and expectations, and grew into her own person. And so, we go to her title. By definition, a dawn streak is a visible streak or a band of color that appears in the clouds or across the horizon just as the sun rises. The dawn of a new day. Hope. I mean, just look at that. Look at that! You cannot look at these two images and tell me it wasn't intentional.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Chen did not return to Yan as the same Chen who left. And weirdly enough, one person who had witnessed this change is Yi. In Chen's IS-6 exploration records, it shows Yi's multiple attempts to seize the Qishao. His first attempt was when Chen was having a rare break in the noodle shop back when she was still working for the LGD. He sends her on a dream sequence of facing her various fears and insecurities, her father, Wei Yanbu, Tallulah, until she faces her worst fear, a Qishao with no light. Regardless, she doesn't care and grabs the Qishao, attempting to slash the shadows, but when it wouldn't work, she sheathed it and bashed the wall, jumping into an upside-down city of lungmen. She wakes up and Yi, a distance away, sighs. He wasn't even able to get it out of the scabbard, and was worried that Chen would flip Lungmen upside down looking for him. His second attempt was in Dossoles, once again in a dream. This time, he confronts her in this dream asking for the Qishao. To his surprise, Chen allows it and hands it over, sheathed. Happy that she was cooperating, he watched as Chen loosened it from her sword belt, unsheathed Qishao, and, after a flash of red, she shoots water straight at Yi's eyes. The dream ends and Yi falls off of the chair he was lounging on. "Chen Huichie!" he exclaims. "I look away for hardly a moment and you've already learned to tell lies." His third attempt was when Chen was heading towards Baizhou. This time, he did not use dreams to trick her, but faced her head-on with a prototype sword. She bested him easily and went on her way, but he was able to make a copy of her Qishao, now complete. Because the Qishao had finally been polished, there was no need for dreams. For beauty lies not in the thing itself, but in what the heart makes of it. We go back to those questions we asked Chen the Holungday. Who is Chen without the backing of her family, without the Qishao? She is Chen Huichie, former LGD superintendent, uninfected, working now as a field operator for Rhodes Island, a sister, a niece, a cousin once removed, inheritor of the legacy and the mission of the Proxy Jie, someone who fights for the equal rights of the infected in recording the truth of history for the sake of the future. And is justice worth fighting for in the face of rampant corruption and evil? Of course it is, and this time, she's ready to face it.
Oh, you've noticed my blade. I was told it can erase history's mistakes. But that's practically half of whatever's been archived in the last 1,000 years. and there's no way a single blade could clean that all up. Let's look to the future instead. The ideals we seek still lie ahead.
One of my favorite bands of all time is Coheed and Cambria. If you don't know who they are a progressive rock metal band whose albums are based off of the comic book series written by their lead singer, Claudio Sanchez, The Armory Wars, though they have branched since then. I've been listening to them since 2002, and I've followed all of their albums from Second Stage Turbine Blade, to Good Apollo I'm Burning Star, to the Afterman set, to the Vax's storyline that bled back into the Afterman set. The plot got pretty crazy.
Cyrus, would you like to initiate freefall?
If you know, you know. One of the jokes my partner and I have regarding Coheed is that you can tell what year the albums came out based on Claudio's singing, the general quality of the albums, and the themes. Like, this was them in 2002. Versus their latest album in 2025. And that's just the natural progression of life. You refine who you are, get better at what you're doing, try new things, and mature over time as you consolidate all these experiences. Since 2002, Claudio moved out of the city, got married, and had a son. He refined his singing and his story writing, which led to the difference between the songs then and now. I'm sure he cringes when he has to look back at the way he used to sing or the production quality of their albums back then. Though I'm sure he doesn't regret releasing those albums. It really showcases the adventure of a band that started with the story of a son rebelling against the world to a father who would do anything for the life of his son. Chen is fascinating because her altars show the evolution or eras of her morality. But at the same time, we see not only her growth as a person, but also the growth of the moral code for all of us. We start off as idealists as children. We think we know right from wrong, good from evil, and we believe we are invincible enough, great enough, that we could change the world into our ideal one through sheer hard work and dedication. And as we grow older, we feel a sort of existential crisis. We learn the limitations of what we are capable of doing. We learn about morally gray areas, the possibility that our sense of justice was not as clear-cut as we thought. We start experiencing the shift of ethics with a change of environment, social acceptability. We leave our comfort zone and have experiences that we would have avoided before. We question ourselves, our capabilities, our morals. And as we mature and gather our experiences together, we're able to take in all of what we've been through and define ourselves thoroughly. Our strengths and limits, our moral flexibilities and boundaries, our flaws and our glories. Mayhaps with a touch of help from therapy. As much as people tend to give Hypergriff grief about the amount of altars and the fact that Chen ended up being the first unit to get an altar, I maintain my stance that I admire these altars because it shows us the growth of these characters. It shows us the effect of time and experience and how it changes them, just as how time and experience changes us in real life. Despite the controversy of Chen the Holungday, I believe it was a necessary step in Chen's story and in her character direction, just as much as I think the second altar was very much a needed resolution for her. In Chen the Dawnstreak's file, there's a line that compares Wei's Qi Shao versus Chen's Qi Shao, and I can't help but find it the most accurate description of her growth. From a woman who recklessly pursued the name of her own justice with no regret, into someone who accepts regret and presses forward regardless. We go back to that old Serenity prayer. God, grant me the courage to change the things I can change, the serenity to accept those I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. But God, grant me the courage not to give up on what I think is right, even though I think it is hopeless.
You said, I want to travel to every dangerous place on Talos 2 and fight injustice wherever I see it.
I remember! And you told me I was being childish.
You know what? I guess our Enfield goober Chen really did take after her grandmother. I think Chen's growth, from Lungmen to Rhodes Island and back to Yan, as well as all the connections of these to her gameplay, are a Ludonarrative win. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this analysis. This has been on the back of my mind since I had made that mini analysis way back in January, and I was so excited to do this analysis in full with the release of Chen the Dawnstreak. I hope I did well. Did you like it? Do you think I'm overthinking? I mean, I know I'm overthinking. That's like the whole point of this series. But I hope that the shoe at least fits and the dots connect. I'm not crazy. Slightly, but not completely. I swear. But I have to say I'm very excited for the future and the precedent that Chen III brings. Fans of this channel know that I have predicted a Spectre Alter, with her third form being the merge of her Seaborn genes and Uripathy. Or another likely one would be Skadi, since her first alter is technically an alternate universe version of her. Who do you think will be our next alter, and what do you think their shift will be? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, I also did this kind of analysis on Siege and Vina Victoria and a 4-part Abyssal Hunter series that I'm super proud of if you've got like 4 hours to spare. Subscribe to me for more lore analysis or gameplay and news in Arknights, and share this with others who you think would enjoy this as well. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!